Hey, this is Larkin Rose here. It is 9/11, 2025. Most Americans, myself included, are, for the most part, very insulated from violence and open brutality in our day to day lives. Now, that's not everybody, it's not all Americans. I think there's an average of 60 some murders a day if you count the entire country. And it's bad enough when there's like an accident or a natural disaster or something, but it's worse in a lot of ways when it's murder, when it's people intentionally killing other people. That adds an extra degree of trauma and horribleness to the situation. So of course we have well, first of all, it's 9/11, which of course reminds people of the day that thousands of Americans were murdered. Also, there's the story that just came out of the woman being stabbed on the subway, and a lot of people are understandably upset by that. And then, of course, Charlie Kirk was just murdered. And so I wanted to do this video about violence because the world is a very big place and lots of very nasty stuff happens in it, and like I said, a lot of us are mostly insulated from that, and we don't have to see it on a daily basis. And when we're detached from it, if it's something happening on the other side of the world, it just feels more abstract, it feels less real, and it feels like more of a tragedy if it happens to somebody you know, or happens in some place you know, or if you knew the victim. But it's not. That's just our subjectivity. That's just, yeah, if your family got murdered, that means a lot more. That's a lot more traumatic than reading on the news, oh, something happened in some country that I can't find on a map and some people were murdered. That's just an abstract story that you know, people can have different levels of empathy and how much they care about that, but they're not really going to care as much as if it was their neighbor or their family member. That's just kind of the nature of humanity. And like I said, it's a very big world and there's lots of people in it and lots of very nasty things happen on a regular basis. And I don't think any human being should be exposed to all that. And I intentionally insulate myself from a lot of it. When people post things, especially about government violence, and send them to me, a lot of the times I don't watch because I don't like, there's only so much that I think a human soul can handle of constantly being exposed to violence and horribleness, without it either being depressing or frustrating or just infuriating or something. So, but of course now we have the very public and intentionally public murder of Charlie Kirk. Now, point of this video is not, it's not even about that particular case, but it's not about like who killed him. If I had to guess, and yes, it's a guess, it wasn't a angry leftist. If I had to guess, my best guess is Charlie made the mistake of not kissing the ass of sociopaths who run the ruling class in Israel, and somebody knocked him off. There are other possibilities, but the point isn't who did it, because I don't pretend to know. The point is about violence and death in general and why it happens so much. And so take the case of Charlie. He was known for debating people. He would go to campuses and ask people. And in a whole lot of those videos, you can see that he was hated for completely stupid reasons. He was hated by people who never listened to him, who never bothered to try to understand what he was saying. They would show up and say, you're a fascist and you're a racist. And he'd say, well, how? And they wouldn't know. They just heard from somebody else, here's somebody you're allowed to hate. And so there was tons of actual intolerance and hatred aimed at him on a regular basis when he was out there trying to have like discourse with people. And you get a bunch of frothing at the mouth, angry leftists just hallucinating crap and then attributing it to other people so they can feel okay about hating other people. They weren't trying to listen. They weren't trying to understand. They were just getting emotional. And they were actually, obviously, openly hateful. Hateful of something they weren't bothering to listen to or understand. Like, there's plenty that's worth condemning in the world, but there's nothing that's worth trying to not understand. And a whole lot of leftists did that. And so now there are a number of leftists who are celebrating Charlie's murder like it's somehow a big win. And that's not only despicable, it's massively hypocritical, and I'm going to get into why. And the fact that he was, Charlie was routinely shouted down, as a lot of conservatives are, by leftists who love the self-righteous feeling of hatred. I get to hate this person because they're a bad person, because my professor said they're a bad person, or the newspaper I read said they're a bad person. So plenty of hatred right out in the open. Now, I don't actually think that's why Charlie was murdered. But still, there was plenty of animosity. But here's the problem here's the part that people aren't really going to want to hear. Charlie Kirk was an advocate of institutionalized violence, like widespread institutionalized violence, by way of law enforcement and by way of the military. Basically, he was in favor of legalized government violence. And that's just as real for the victims of that. And the fact that we don't know their names and we weren't there to see it, and it wasn't broadcast on live TV, and it wasn't thrown up on all the screens for 24-hour coverage over and over again, doesn't change the fact that lots and lots of people have been murdered by the U.S. military, by the Israeli military, by lots of governments all over the world. There were just 11 people blown up on a boat, just outright murdered. And the claim is, well, they were bringing drugs into the country, which is not a good reason to murder somebody. Other people are saying, actually, they're more likely smuggling people in, like innocent people that also just got murdered. But we don't know, and we didn't see it, and we didn't have to see an up close. Here's the picture of them right before the bomb hit. Here's their names. Here's their lives. They weren't people we knew. They weren't people we hear from. And that's true of so many things that the U.S. military does, government militaries all over the world do. But it's easy to be detached. And ironically, it gets easier to be detached when it becomes incomprehensible. When there's a story of, there's some military action happened somewhere and hundreds of people died or thousands of people died. Like, it's just as real for every one of those people. The people living somewhere where a bomb hit and it blew their family members to shreds, they had to see it. They knew the names of those people. They were there. They saw it. It had to happen. It was real, just as real as woman being stabbed on the subway or Charlie Kirk being murdered. It's just as real. And we can sort of think something is more of a tragedy because it was somebody we knew or somebody we cared about or somebody close to us or somebody just geographically close to us in a place we know. But there's so much insulation from the reality of violence and death in the world that comes from the way people watch news and the way people think about politics and government. And it's, It's uncomfortable to talk about this right after a murder. Lots of people will say that, well, Charlie Kirk, he was all about open, polite discussion and just exchanging ideas. No, he wasn't. Charlie Kirk advocated violence and death by way of the state. He did, whether you want to admit that or not. Now, he wasn't committing it, he was talking about it. And he was trying to have polite exchanges. But to try to pretend that there's such a thing as polite and respectful discussion when you're talking about the advocacy of state violence, it's just sort of insane, and it's an insanity that's inherent to statism, to the belief in government, to the belief in politics, that, well, if we dress nicely and we sit here and we have a calm exchange while talking about real violence being used against real people, well, then we're civilized and we're good and we're moral. It's just words. We're just having a discussion. And it isn't just that. And the violence, or the victims of the violence that Charlie Kirk and countless other conservatives, including me back when I was one, advocate, they're just as real. Those are real people going through real suffering, sometimes really being murdered in the name of law enforcement when they didn't threaten or harm anybody. Or in the name of national defense when they happened to be in the wrong country when the U.S. military was empire building. But the fact that people can so cavalierly talk about political violence is because of the way people think about it and because of the belief system that most people have that, well, if it's legalized, it's the law. And I watched Charlie say that over and over again. Well, what about this violence? What about people being locked up for, like, having the wrong plant? Well, it's the law. That doesn't mean anything. That doesn't explain anything. That doesn't make anything okay. If there was a law saying it's okay to assassinate Charlie Kirk, would that be okay? Well, I mean, it's the law. They were just carrying out the law. Would that make it any better? And the fact that all statists, all of them, left, right, Democrat, Republican, they all condone real violence against real people, and almost none of them recognize that. So on the one hand, it's obviously evil that here's this guy, he sits around talking and explaining what he believes, and there's other people celebrating, well, I'm glad he got murdered because he said stuff I didn't like. Like, that's really, really screwed up. And you're a hateful, intolerant psycho if you think the proper response to somebody having opinions you don't like is to murder them. And at the same time, so no, none of what I'm saying means he should have been murdered, he deserved it. At the same time, everybody who believes in politics, in government, in law, constantly, casually advocates actual violence against real people. And I keep seeing the line, violence has no place in political discourse. That statement is just insane. Political discourse is a discussion of how you want state violence used against other human beings. That's all it is. To try to pretend that that can be civilized or polite or respectful, well, I don't use judgmental words and raise my voice while advocating violent aggression against huge numbers of people. That doesn't make it okay. And the fact that people are so insulated from the violence they personally condone, left and right, everybody who believes in government, makes so many people end up being confused by, why is there all this violence? And you can point at any particular case of, well, there was violence over here because, this guy who was convicted of nasty, horrible crimes over and over again, he kept getting let go. by the ruling class. And you can complain, oh, people aren't able to defend themselves because of gun control, or people are so irresponsible that they're not watching out for their neighbors. Like, there's plenty you can complain about, and rightly so. But there's an underlying source of violence that most people don't notice, and they don't notice that they help it. They contribute to that. And, like, again, I'll offend some people. I see lots of people saying Charlie Kirk was a good Christian. No, he fucking wasn't. He advocated violent aggression against his fellow man, as all conservatives do, as all liberals do. And I know you can't speak ill of the dead. Yes, I can. It's not a virtue getting killed. It's sad what happened. It shouldn't have happened. That's not okay. And no, he wasn't a Christian. 0 people who are conservatives are Christians. They love to wear the label while advocating violent aggression against their fellow man. And so the idea that there can be such a thing as polite and respectful and civil discourse on the topic of how should state violence be inflicted on everybody I know and everybody I don't know. It's insane, and people don't get that this is the natural outcome of believing in government. And, you know, it's really easy, and it's justified for people to be very critical today of unhinged leftists who are either openly advocating or cheering for or making excuses for just murdering their political opponents. Well, he believes things I don't, so he should be killed. And half the time, they don't even know what he believes because they never listen to him. And so the irony is, yeah, I think Charlie Kirk was an advocate of immoral violence, as all statists are, all conservatives are, all liberals are. But the reason he was hated by the left was not that, because they do the exact same thing. Mostly the reason he was hated by a bunch of unhinged leftists is because they love the self-righteous feeling of hating somebody who they decided is bad, and it gets in the way of that, actually listening to somebody and trying to understand that. And so, to his credit, Charlie Kirk tried to have an exchange so that there would actually be an understanding. And a lot of leftists were very determined to just hate him without understanding. But the difference isn't that the left are pro-violence and the right aren't. It's just that some of the unhinged left is more openly and sort of more honestly violent. Like Antifa. I mean, the irony of we're anti-fascist, and we demonstrate that by thinking and behaving exactly like fascists, where we try to violently condemn and attack and shut down and censor anybody we disagree with. And when the thuggery becomes personal and they're doing it themselves, we disagree, so we're going to come shout down Charlie Kirk. We're all going to come yell so nobody can hear him. Like, that's obnoxious and rude and idiotic and hypocritical and a whole bunch of other negative things. Like, you're personally demonstrating how uncivilized and irrational and violent you are. But it isn't better for humanity to be polite and well-dressed and well-spoken while advocating that somebody else do your violence for you. And that's what all conservatives do. That's what a lot of liberals do, too. We're just going to be here and have a discussion of how we need free health care and so on and so forth. And none of them think of the realities of what they condone. For example, when I bash people for, they just want to give away free health care. Really? Paid for by what? Asking nicely? No, by taxation. Well, what's that? That's a giant ruling class demanding money from millions and millions of people under threat of doing nasty things to them. You know how many people have committed suicide because of IRS problems? Enough that there are entries in the Internal Revenue Manual the IRS's manual, telling them how to deal with suicidal taxpayers because it happens so often. So the people generously advocating giving away free stuff, they're ignoring the violence that has to come first, which is the violent extortion, which is taxation. Is that okay that they advocate that everybody they know be forcibly robbed? Well, it's for this good cause. Why don't you talk about the violence? And most of them don't even admit it to themselves. So even something as benign sounding as, I just want free healthcare and free college. No, you want violent robbery against your fellow man, and you don't recognize it as that. You don't get that you're a cheerleader for violence. And of course, the same is true on the right. I support the troops. Well, what do the troops do? They go around the world initiating violence in other countries against other people. No, they fight for freedom. The ridiculous stories that people tell themselves to feel better about the state violence they condone. Or, I'm for gun control. What does that mean? It means heavily armed, violent thugs of the state should go capture and cage or kill anybody who doesn't hand over their guns. That's the reality of gun control. And you saw it with the Branch Davidians outside Waco. You saw it with the Weaver family, who was terrorized, and Vicki Weaver was murdered, and a lot of people don't even know those stories. That's gun control in real life. And I see people like quoting Charlie Kirk thinking it's a gotcha, quoting him saying, yeah, people being armed, the result is some people will use guns to do bad things and kill people. And that's still less bad than having gun control. And by the way, he's totally right on that. But lots of people are like, well, now do you think that, now that somebody murdered you? It was already illegal to murder him. You think somebody was going to be, oh, well, I would have murdered him, but there's a gun control law saying I can't. Gun control is gun violence. But the entire concept of law and political authority lets the advocates of gun violence not even recognize it, not even inside their own heads. Recognize that you're condoning violent aggression, including against me, by the way. I have an AR-15. If you advocate they be illegal, you are advocating that men with, if I don't give mine up, that men with guns come and initiate violence against me. Is that compassionate and loving? Does that show how tolerant that you are as a leftist? Or are you cheering for real violence against real people, but you feel okay about it because it's legalized? Same thing Charlie Kirk did, same thing conservatives do all over the place. The whole immigration thing of, well, politicians said you're not allowed to be on anywhere in this half a continent unless you have the written permission of the ruling class. So that's the law. So violently kidnapping people, well, that's the law. It's not okay. And cheering for that is screwed up, and it's evil. An act of violence that involves somebody you know that's put on all the screens and talked about incessantly, that's not in any objective way any more inherently evil than an act of violence against somebody that you've never heard of. You've never seen them. You didn't have to see the actual violence happening. It's only affecting people you don't know. Maybe people on the other side of the world you don't even heard of. You don't even know where they are. You don't know what's going on. You knowing about it doesn't make something more evil. It can make it feel more personal to you. It can make you care about it more. But if it's some statistic, oh, I read a story, 43 people were blown up in something in some country on the other side of the world. Yeah, those were 43 actual people. I just made up that number. I mean, sadly, there's an infinite number of real-world examples you could use. When it's just a number of people died. Oh, killed in some military skirmish or in some bombing. This many people, this many children died. That can just be a line in a story to you if you don't know them, if you haven't seen them, if you didn't have to watch it happening. That doesn't make it any less evil, and people have become so numb to the evil they condone and they vote for. And then they're traumatized and shocked and horrified by a single act of evil violence that they had to see, that they had to experience, at least on a screen, happening to somebody they know. And it's, I mean, it being 9/11, the lack of objectivity of Americans is just amazing. What's the worst atrocity ever? 9/11. Do you think the world ends at the line around the United States? Do you have any idea how many people the U.S. military, how many civilians the U.S. military has murdered? Have you even heard of the firebombing of Dresden, the firebombing of Tokyo, the nuclear devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki? At least most Americans have heard of that. Oh, it was necessary. Because reasons. I bet if you had to stand there and watch people go through that, you'd be horrified. You'd be traumatized for the rest of your life. And you wouldn't just dismiss it as a thing that happened to somebody else. So, of course, lots of people are going to be getting angry and upset at these things, and rightly so. But that doesn't change principles. Let's go get frustrated. We have to do something about it. No. We don't have to do anything differently today than we did yesterday. It doesn't change morality. It doesn't change right and wrong. If you want to try harder to do what was already right, yeah. People being more aware of the people around them. If somebody had been there to protect the woman who got stabbed, or if the system didn't let that guy go, or if somebody else took the law into their own hands and actually stopped that murder, or 60 other murders every day in the country, because it's happening constantly. It's just there's so many of us that only a tiny minority actually experience it, but it's still happening a lot. So if you want to say people should be more prepared and they should be more aware and they should, if you want to say people need to do more to do the good things, okay, that's one thing. But if it's, I'm upset and emotional, so we really need to choose the group to hate and ramp up bring in the National Guard and have a government solution. The people, we need more gun control. We need more state violence against people who haven't threatened anybody. No, we don't. We need to really crack down on anybody who votes Democrat. No, we don't. Morality didn't change since a few days ago. And people getting upset and emotional, however justified that may be, it doesn't change what needs to happen. It doesn't change how people need to think. So I'm going to end with this. While you're mourning the woman who got stabbed, Charlie Kirk getting murdered, or any number of other horrible things, or while you're getting depressed or bummed out or frustrated or outraged, righteously angry, the first thing you need to do this. Make sure you're not part of the cause of it. And if you play the game of politics, you are. You are part of the cause of it because you cheer for violence against other people. The assassination of political figureheads, why is that a thing? Because there's political power. You don't have to murder people over political power if there isn't political power. There doesn't have to be the hatred and violence against this group of the population and that group of population if they're not arguing over who should rule everybody. If they actually understand peaceful coexistence, that none of that matters, none of that happens. So, Yeah, while you're being upset and feeling whatever you're going to feel, make sure you're not part of the cause of the problem. Charlie Kirk was part of the cause of the problem. And all the leftists who totally hated him were also part of the cause of the problem, because they all believe in government. They all believe in legalized violence. They all believe in state aggression. They're just bickering about how it should be used. And when it comes out into the open like this, and you see the violence, then you can be shocked and horrified, and it's nasty and it's unpleasant. But if you've been cheering for political violence your whole life and voting for it because you think, well, it's legal, so it's okay, in what way is that better than doing violence yourself? So you forever get the left and right arguing over which political violence should prevail. Those are the only two choices. When you're voting for violence or violence. That's it. That's what government is. Even George Washington said that. Government is not reason. It is not eloquence. It is not reason. It is violence. It is force. So people are just arguing over how their neighbors should be forcibly dominated and what they should be forcibly extorted to pay for. And then they wonder why things like this happen. If you aren't on the side of peaceful coexistence, and almost nobody is, maybe hold off on self-righteously condemning the inevitable consequences of what you believe in and what you condone. Yeah, you can be shocked and horrified at individual cases of this is horrible, this person's getting murdered right in front of a huge audience. This person is getting stabbed to death on the subway. Regardless of the details of who did what. Yeah, it's horrible to have to see man's inhumanity to man. Almost all of you are contributing to it. And you don't have the honesty to look at yourself and actually check. And I didn't for the longest time. I was a conservative for the longest time. I was a statist for many, many years. And it was uncomfortable actually re-examining that and thinking, am I accidentally being a cheerleader for evil and for violence against my fellow man? And the answer was yes, which is a very uncomfortable answer that I didn't want to admit. So you're looking out here at political related violence. If you vote for masters, if you believe in political parties, and you're wondering, how could this have happened? Who made this happen? You did. And if you can't re-examine your belief system and look at the literal reality of what it is that you condone while thinking you're the good guy, then we get more of this over and over and over again. It's most of human history. Most violence has come from struggles for authority, the right to rule, political power. And if you're playing that game, you're just empowering it. So yeah, you can be outraged. Like, you didn't shoot Charlie, you didn't stab that woman. But if you're still falling for the game of politics, you are absolutely empowering the mentality and the philosophy and the mindset and the attitude that leads to such things. So yeah, you can condemn other people. That's pretty easy. And everybody can point the finger at somebody else and condemn somebody else. But until you can look in the mirror and be all the way honest with yourself and actually check, am I all the way advocating peaceful coexistence with my fellow man? Am I actually doing unto others as I want them to do unto me? Then you're just getting upset at something that you helped to create. And Charlie helped to create. And the people who hate him helped to create. And this is going to keep happening until the decent people dare to stop falling for this and stop letting psychopaths divide us and stop making excuses for why you advocate political violence against your fellow man. Because when it lands in your lap, when it happens here, 9/11, a building falls over, how could this have happened? Regardless of who you even think did that, it happened because of statism. It happened because of political power. Because of a state that exists, because of people who believe in political power and vote for it and obey it and pay taxes to it. It's a symptom. You see examples of violence here and there. It's a symptom. Please, please take time to make sure that you're not being outraged at a symptom while you're part of the underlying disease causing it.